Well, Fathers, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you all here. And for all of our viewers who are watching us today in this recorded Zoom call, we appreciate your collaboration and your support of our mission here at Kenrick-Glennon Seminary. I'm joined with Father Brian Alford from the Diocese of Springfield, Illinois, Father Tony Ritter from here in the local Archdiocese of St. Louis, as well as Father Scott Schilmoeller from the Archdiocese of Omaha, all proud alumni of Kenrick Seminary, all working now in vocations ministry. And we're really grateful for this opportunity to have a discussion about where is the current landscape of vocation ministry going? What are some of the current trends that we're all seeing? And how do we help young people really capture and develop and cultivate a positive imagination for a religious discerning, a religious discernment of what one's vocation might be? So, Fathers, I'm just going to open up the conversation to all of you. Where would you say we're currently at? What do we see in the current landscape as you do vocations ministry and any of the trends that you've seen in recent years?
I didn't live through this time, so I'm curious if Father Alfred or Father Schilmoeller have even more insights. But just noticing when I was becoming vocation director, it was just after COVID, and all the vocation directors of the nation were talking about how fewer men were able to discern. And I'm sure that goes to religious also. But now, a few years removed from COVID, I'm seeing a lot of people that maybe would have been discerning during the COVID years now returning and asking those questions again. I've been just delighted, very grateful for the work of my predecessors to make that all possible, but delighted by some of the good momentum around vocations that I'm seeing here in St. Louis.
Yeah, I've experienced, going from parishes to schools to youth groups, that there are a number of young guys who've had the thoughts for asking the questions, but many of them, just like I think this is a trend in culture in general, that commitment is difficult regardless of what they're doing. And so I talk to people who run businesses, and they say, like, it's really hard to make good hires because commitment is just tough. We have young guys who are afraid to ask girls on dates. I work at a Newman Center, and that's kind of a thing. And so I have a lot of conversations with a lot of young men, but the difficulty in making a commitment and the fear that they have, I think a lot of times they're in their heads a lot, and they need to learn how to exit their head and enter into conversation with other people, and not just assume in their own minds that if they really ask this question, they're doomed to be a priest forever. If they go on a seminary visit, it means something huge. If they go to seminary, I think there's a fear of the loss of freedom that a lot of them have. So there's a lot of them that are asking the questions and interested, but a lot of them that I've experienced have a real difficult time committing to even a next step.
Yeah, I think that's something we see as well. We have, various vocation events that take place. So whether it's Andrew dinners, discernment retreats, and it seems as though there have been some people that show up more than one time, and there's a sense in which that notion of discerning is something that I think guys maybe feel like that's a good thing. That's a sign of their growing in holiness. And so I think they're happy to be a part of kind of that process of discernment, and yet there's a bit of a fear to sort of take that next step, whether it's actually applying or having a more serious conversation about that. So I think some guys just kind of get stuck in that. So, well, I can be discerning and for a long period of time and never really have to make that commitment. I think they enjoy the fraternity. I think they enjoy really thinking about and praying about what God might be calling them to. But there is that, that sense maybe that if I say yes, then, as we just said, that maybe I'm losing out on something. I need to leave my options open just in case something better comes along. So I think that's a trend that we've seen as well.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think there might be two extremes that I've seen. Maybe you guys can speak into this too. There's the over-reflective, where they're just in their minds overly thinking about excruciating What's this going to mean for my future? And then the enemy gets in, and there's all sorts of like, you're doomed and all sorts of stuff. Or there's the under-reflective, the guy who just like, I just want to go. Like, let's go. Let's do this thing. And you're like, hold on. Let's like, who are you? Like, where are you from? And so there's the the over-reflective is kind of an avoidance of actually like relationships with other people, bring it out in the open. And I think the under-reflective, there's an avoidance of themselves. There might be an avoidance of just kind of like their own situation and wanting to jump into something. I've seen this extreme where there's those who don't really jump at much, but they should be jumping, they should be entering in. And then those who jump too quickly, and you're like, I don't know, hold on. This is a process. So it's kind of two extremes.
Those two extremes, seem to be governed a lot by fear or impulsivity, right? Where is the prudent discernment in the middle ground to say, I'm comfortable with myself, I'm comfortable with this state of my life right now, and I feel like Jesus has invited me to take this next step, and I do so boldly and generously. That doesn't always just naturally happen for a young person. So to be able to help someone move into that is a great gift, but also a great challenge. Just staying with these themes on some of the challenges, we could point to maybe some negative factors that are really not helpful in someone's approach to discernment. Maybe some lies or some false assumptions of what God might be asking someone in their life, or how they should feel about serving the Lord, especially if there's a real heaviness or a false sense of responsibility. Fathers, anything that you want to add to the conversation about what is really not helpful with a very false or confused sense of discernment in how someone is seeking to serve the church or to serve God?
I think there's connections even to what we were just saying about commitment. Sometimes just commitment to relationship with the Lord, and how easy it is, even for us as priests, I'm sure, and I notice it in myself, to have a false understanding of who the Lord is and a false understanding of who I am. And anytime that comes up, it's going to be an obstacle to our discernment, right? If the Lord is expecting me, I have to do this, this is the only way I'm going to become holy, or the Lord demands X, Y, and Z for me, rather than this invitation, like it was with Mary in the Annunciation. Sometimes there's even this reluctance to pray and turning the priesthood into an occupation rather than this gift of oneself to the Lord and his bride, the church. So maybe just to summarize, like an obstacle is not doing this with Jesus. You become a priest for Jesus, and that's got to be the primary motivation, not for any of these ulterior motives.
I think that's the root, what Father Ritter is saying. Yeah, I think that, well, this culture now, this is the first culture in human history that's grown up completely on a screen. We've never had that before. And so there's a trained disconnection from, like, I don't know, other people, reality, but they want it. I mean, these young men are just really good. But a lot of times there's a learning how that needs to take place really before discernment, of like how to be in relationship to the Lord, how to be in relationship with other people, so that it's not just kind of like them in their own heads trying to figure out all the details, and then the weight of the rest of their life, of the diocese, of whatever, falls upon them, and then they're going to be alone. Here's a lie. I'm going to be alone. Well, I'm going to die alone. That's kind of what I've heard. Yeah, my sister is married and she's got someone to be with her, and so there's this real fear of aloneness, but there's a trained aloneness from like how they grow up. And so the training, I think, undergirds everything, is to lean with them into relationship with the Lord and good and authentic relationships with other people who can support them. So Father Ritter, I think that's absolutely the root.
One of the challenges as well, and I think this is becoming less and less of a challenge, but seminary formation has really evolved over the past couple of decades to where so much emphasis is given to those four dimensions of formation that some of our priests serving in our presbyteries who are doing so very faithfully have received a different type of formation, and so as they try to encourage and maybe try to understand what it is these men are going through, their experience is not quite as on the same level. Just to the point that was just made by these two guys is that just that primacy of that interiority and that relationship with the Lord. Not that guys in previous generations were not that it wasn't an emphasis, but it seems as though you hear about guys speaking about even just the language of studying for the priesthood. I think that speaks of a view of formation that was really primarily that academic, and guys didn't always have great experiences of formation, and they were happy to get out, and they talk about the crazy times that were there. So I think it's hard for them maybe to provide that type of encouragement and support of how to help those men. I think really understand that formation is so much broader than that, and really encouraging that relationship with the Lord, the value of human formation, all of that building upon that. Academic formation is certainly something key, but it has to be integrated. So that's where I think it's less of an issue, because more and more younger priests are filling up our presbyteries. But I think there's an element that's still there that I think can be a bit of a challenge and not always helpful to guys that are trying to search for answers, and oftentimes are going to their pastor first because it's who they know. And if that priest maybe doesn't have that type of experience, he may find it hard to articulate what it is that man will experience, because he's speaking from a place of a different experience of formation, not always a great experience, yet at the same time still trying to witness to the love of his priesthood in a way that's in many ways quite heroic, but is sort of not quite fully grasping, I think, that the formation environment that we are blessed with now.
What's wild too is that in this contrast, there's this emphasis on the interior life, especially in seminary, which I was so grateful to receive. And yet there's a lower baseline of interiority. I'd say that someone who went to seminary, say 30, 40, 50 years ago, already was more recollected because he wasn't bombarded by social media and carrying around thousands of millions of songs on their phone constantly. Like every Lent when I cut out social media, I'm like, wow, I can think so much more clearly, and I have such a better relationship with the Lord, and I'm so much more recollected. And if that's the case for me as a priest, and I'm not too immersed in all the noise of the world, like how much harder it is for someone who's just growing up in this culture. So maybe there's an added reason for that emphasis in seminary, because it's not very present for many of us.
Brother Brian, I like that phrase you use, that even the language of going to seminary has changed. How many generations have gone off to seminary telling their friends and family members, I'm going to go study for the priesthood, as if this is just simply an academic exercise. And I know with the new plan for priestly formation, version 6, we're really trying to move seminary formation off of that academic language to say that one's advancement and one's readiness for holy orders is not tied to an academic chassis, as if we're just riding along, I've passed my classes, so somebody please ordain me now. But really a much deeper sense and a holistic sense that my interiority is so configured to Christ, and my self-possession is so prepared now to be able to make a gift of myself that I'm ready to go lead others in spiritual fatherhood. It just makes me wonder, what will become the new, the common lingo in the next century among American Catholics? Rather than saying, well, I'm going to seminary to study for the priesthood, what's going to be the new catchphrase to say, I'm going to go be formed to be a priest? Or, I mean, it's a bit of a mouthful to say, I'm going to go to seminary so I can be configured to Christ our Savior. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it'll be interesting to see what the new language will be that's going to capture a more holistic sense of what formation might be. We'll have to wait and see. Just pointing out some of these challenges, it also gives us the opportunity to say, what are some of the positive aspects that are really contributing towards forming a healthy imagination for what seminary life could be, and what a healthy vision is for moving with God's grace and wanting to respond in a way that's really appropriate to this stage of my life, following Jesus on the next step of formation, not necessarily having the next 8 or 50 years planned out. What do you suppose is really helpful for discerners or anyone helping somebody discern to capture this very positive sense of an imaginative understanding of moving with God's grace without having all the pressure of the world upon one's shoulders? Any ideas on that, fathers?
Yeah, I think back to Father Ritter, what he was saying in the context of a relationship with the Lord, where you're coming to know who he is, what he's like towards you as an individual, then I think young men can really make a contrast between that and like the other voice of pressure. Hopefully they have a spiritual director. Hopefully they have some others that can walk with them. But to really experience the voice of the Lord and the freedom that's there can really set someone up to then be like, oh, this anxiety and fear is very different than how I've experienced the Lord to be. And that I think having others to walk with these young men so that they can, enter into that relationship with the Lord, kind of remain there. Notice the difference between the voices of anxiety, of the world, how the Lord is with them, and how different he is, and then acknowledging their own desires interiorly and being able to state them in a free way. I've been asking guys lately, if they were to imagine their heart was a bar graph and every bar is a desire in their life, how would they plot their biggest desires without judging or editing the desire? Just like, what's your biggest desire? Like bar chart your heart. And then give the guys, like, they might need time to do that. But then the ones that are like the good and innocent and holy desires that really well up, encouraging the man that, like, how did the Lord bring that alive in you? And walking with him continually, how is he going to bring that alive even more in the future? And that's your vocation. That's how I try to encourage them. So a couple thoughts.
One thing that I find really encouraging and really helpful for, I think, this positive view of discernment is for those who are discerning to actually have an encounter with other men that are discerning, and also in particular seminarians, that as they are getting the opportunity in formation to receive a new invitation to look at their relationship with the Lord, and then to be able to articulate that. It's a beautiful thing for me to just listen as our guys share with one another how the Lord is working in their lives, and how they can speak in such just a very articulate way, a way that is not just sort of trying to say the right pious words, but it really is from a place of encountering the Lord in their weaknesses, in those dark places of their hearts where they've felt closed off and not understood, but then to receive this new light, this new formation support from the seminary. And then, to the extent that these young men that are discerning hear that from somebody that's not that different in age, sometimes the same age, for them to hear a man speaking so joyfully and authentically and vulnerably gives a lot of encouragement to them to say, wow, this is possible. His life is not so much different than mine. For them to hear a vocation director or a formator, whatever, to kind of speak that way, you sort of expect that. But from their peers that they work with on a regular basis, in class, the level of deep conversation is just not always there. And so then to encounter somebody who is at a similar state in life, speaking about their relationship with the Lord freely and with great with great love in their heart. I think that is something that stirs something within these men, that they're like, yeah, that's what I desire. I desire to have that type of encounter, that type of being known by somebody, by the Lord, and being able to allow that to be a space where I can bring my life to the Lord, to reveal His love in the midst of all of that. I have found that to be personally edifying, and I know that that's a really a beautiful witness for men that are discerning as well.
Yeah, piggybacking on what you just said, Father Brian, I think there's a real despair. I just had someone in my office recently who, and very well meaning, he didn't mean any offense by this, but was very convinced that someone who was celibate could not be happy. And was very much like, no, there's no way that someone celibate could be happy. And
As he's talking to you, a very joyful man,
I was like, you don't think Jesus was happy? Like, and like, we had a good conversation about it, but that's, I think, especially the fear that the Lord can't satisfy, that the Lord won't fulfill the deepest longings of our heart. It may be especially evident with religious life or with the contemplative life. I know when my sister entered a cloistered monastery, that was constantly the fear of family, of her friends, and probably of myself in some way. And I go out and speak at high schools, and I can show pictures of my sister, and I can show, this is what her life is like. But it's very hard for someone to understand that she doesn't like reluctantly do this, that she is so happy. And like every time I go out there, it's this beautiful shot in the arm of, look at how happy these people are, happier than I am, because they're surrendered so much of themselves to the Lord and are being loved and received by Him, and can just rejoice in this relationship. Do they have their bad days? Absolutely. Do we as priests have our bad days? Absolutely. But gosh, I'm so blessed by this vocation, and I love being a priest. This isn't some cross that I have to, sure, does it look like a cross sometimes? Sure, but I love being able to give of myself in this way with the Lord.
Brother Scott, you were talking about how a man could make a bar graph about the desires of his own heart. I think that's actually a very creative approach. I'm going to steal that. But back to Father Brian's point, when a man has not encountered, holistic people with whom he can be in relationship, if he hasn't had a lot of witnesses of people who are living with the Lord in a deep and abiding way, he might not have ever even found the formative skills to do that interior examination to say, what are my desires? And how could I actually rank them in terms of their strength in order to put them on a bar graph? That's some of the accompaniment that has to be done. But putting people in a healthy environment, whether that's with a Newman Center, Bible study, whether this is a high school discernment group, whether they're being discipled by a local parish pastor or a campus minister, putting them in relationship to others who are living in the depths, so to speak, with the Lord, will help them kind of do that interiority work to see what are the true desires of my heart, because I've never taken the moment to do that self-introspection. I was also thinking, Father Scott, as you were speaking about, I was once speaking to a Sarah club, and they were asking me, what are all the new things that we should be doing to help people? And I said, if you have any young people in your life with whom you're in contact, please just teach them how to pray. Actually teach them how to find the voice of the Lord and recognize that. Otherwise, they're going to be trying to follow all these other voices because they've never zeroed in on the true shepherd's voice and generously and enthusiastically wanting to follow his voice. They all looked at me like they were just stunned, like, I don't know that I know how to pray, let alone I'm supposed to help young people learn how to pray. But hopefully they were receiving that as a way to say the relationship with God has to be primary if someone's really going to follow in an authentic calling towards this consecrated life.
Yeah, I think, again, back to the relationship, that's kind of the theme I think we're coming back to more and more is accompanied in relationship with the Lord. remaining with the Lord in a community of people who can like support that. I think it's the biggest. I think it's the biggest. The biggest thing that helps young people today is authentic, supportive Christian community where they're learning how to meet Jesus. And those are that's actually where vocations are coming from, kind of. I'd be bold to say almost entirely from my experience. I don't know any other places vocations are coming from, unless there's a supportive Christian community of some sort where they're learning how to meet Jesus. That could be the family, that could be a parish youth group, a Newman Center, a friend group. But if that's not there, it's like, anytime I talk to someone who's kind of does not have a supportive group surrounding them, it seems like humanly something's lacking. It's difficult for them.
Yeah,
So
well
then
stated.
support them by trying to get them to join some sort of thing, or encourage them in that way.
Well, thank you. That's well stated. Lastly, fathers, as we kind of bring this discussion to a close, not to end on a sour note, but is there anything that you'd like to highlight about maybe things that are cheapening a young person's discernment as they seek to follow God's will? You know, cliche things or programs that are not really being helpful, or things that are not giving a robust encounter with Jesus in a mutually supportive environment. Anything that comes to mind that would be helpful to kind of root out from a culture of vocations?
One thing that, I have noticed in that as our men enter into the formation or the application process, there's always obviously our psychological evaluation. And, inevitably, as with any evaluation, it brings back, certain things for a man to work on. And there are times whenever those things really need to be probably addressed before entering seminary. And, it's you get the pushback sometimes from a pastor or somebody that's accompanying a man. And, they're like, this guy's a great candidate, and you're putting the brakes on him because of, something that was in a psychological evaluation. And it's as though it's like, yeah, everybody's got something, but, they can go to seminary and they can deal with that there. It's not that big of a deal. And I think that it's just, I think that doesn't really do service to the man. I think there's just a real value for him to have that knowledge of where it is he's in need of growth, and if that needs to be attended to, first, I mean, we're not losing anything in that. I mean, that's giving him the ability, I think, to then enter into formation with greater freedom, as opposed to carrying with him sort of a burden it's just gonna prevent him from fully, I think, experiencing, what the church intends. And so I think there's that pressure sometimes that the seminaries see that they can take care of that, or let's why should we have that standard so high? Why ever reject anybody because they're they've got the interest, they've got the a lot of things going well for them, and how could we delay that for them? So I think that temptation is constantly there. I think especially as you notice more and more guys struggling with things, and sometimes you have to have that difficult conversation and say, well, we really need to maybe work on this first and spend some intentional time by addressing that, and then you're just kind of facing that reality that guys, just young people in general, just have a certain fragility about them, and then to bring up, that there's something that's, not quite right or not perfect, or that is in need of promotion, and they hear that as a no, and sometimes just kind of sort of shut down. But that strikes me as it's a little bit of a challenge that's out there, that there's the pressure sometimes to say, let's just kind of lower those standards a little bit so that we can get these guys in and not discourage them, because if you didn't say no, some guys just, never come back. And so therefore it's your fault because you didn't, you were too rigid or whatnot. So I think that's one of the challenges that I've seen over the past, several years that I think we'll continue to face as guys really struggle with more and more things with their mental health and anxiety and addictions and attachments that are unhealthy. So,
Good.
Yeah. Go for it, Scott.
Oh, okay. Two things is kind of connected to that. I think what cheapens discernment for a lot of guys is I think an expectation within them and from without of what success looks like. So success is getting into seminary, success is staying in seminary, and it's failure to not get into seminary. It's failure, something's wrong, something's off. And so who's to blame? And I think the number two, which is really kind of the root of this, is kind of an avoidance of the humanity of the discerner for the sake of whatever. I don't know. We need priests. We need numbers. Don't you know we need priests? A guy who really wants to go to seminary, why can't he just up and go to seminary? I mean, it's like we would never say that about being another professional, degree somewhere. Like, hey, this guy wants to be like a surgeon. Why won't you let him be a surgeon? Well, can't get out of bed in time in the morning. It's like he can't really hold his life together very well. It's like we can't just let him be a surgeon. And so an avoidance of a guy's humanity, and now he's a seminarian and the status of seminarian and this and that. And so a warped view of what success looks like, instead of success, I think it would be good to redefine success. Success is walking with a man to meet Jesus in his humanity to what is the next step that's best for him. That's success. And success is when a man is able to do that. That someone is able to walk with him in that way, and then a man is able to respond. And if that means not going to seminary, praise the Lord. If that means not staying in seminary because he's coming to know himself more and he's experiencing freedom, he shouldn't stay in seminary. So I think those are two things that Father Brian, I think piggybacking on what you said, I think are just kind of cheapen it, make it difficult.
And very similarly, and this might be connected to that, not seeing the humanity of the seminarians, is making sure that we're not counting our seminarians as future priests, right? They are men who are discerning. This is not a priest. The seminary is not a priest factory. It's not like, oh, well, we're going to have this many priests in the future. It's these men are discerning the will of the Lord. And if they hear a no, either from the Lord or from seminary or from their own hearts, that's a success. It's not a failure if someone leaves seminary, right? There's a lot of freedom there often. And it's important for the men here to know that as they're discerning, but also for people in the world not to be like, oh, we're so disappointed you didn't get ordained from our parish. No, thank you for having the courage to go discern this. And thank you for building yourself as a good man that you're going to serve the people you're around, whether you're called to be a priest or not. And so just to have that sort of healthy detachment, but good support of those who are choosing to discern, not, becoming, future priests by entering seminary.
Just an example of an experience that I had last spring. I took 3 or 4 guys to visit Kenrick. One of our Omaha guys was in the process of discerning out, and he had done really well in his discernment. And so everyone knew that he was discerning out. And the guys that I brought to visit Kenrick were there his last 2 days and were able to have dinner with the Omaha men and thank this guy for being a seminarian and wish him well. And the guys, as we were coming back, we're surprised at how positive of an experience it was to see someone leave seminary. And that the rest of the community was just supportive, and just like, no one was like casting a stone. He didn't have to hide from the community. Everybody knew what was going on, and it just worked out really well. And it just was so freeing for our young men visiting, because they could imagine, like, well, if I was ever in that situation, would I have to kind of like in the night, cut, run, or would I, they saw, oh, this is what happens when discernment goes.
Beautiful. How providential.
Mhm.
So great insights, fathers. It's so helpful just to be able to name some of these things and to hold these men in honesty and transparency, to say this is where they're at. They're young, they're in seminary, they're seeking to do the Lord's will, but we're not putting the ordination invitations yet, and they're still seeking to know themselves and to figure out where does Jesus ultimately want them to serve him, and to strive and seek holiness in their own respective lives. Father Alford, with your work in the diocese, what happens years down the road for a priest that was not attentive to his humanity early on. And it's such a great service to be able to read a man's application and his psychological evaluation in honesty and say, there's no need here to rush into this. It would actually be an act of charity for the man himself and for the overall church to say, let's take some time to address these things. And whatever vocation you're called to assume someday in life, you're going to be all the better because you've done that deeper work to integrate your own humanity into your spiritual life a little bit more deeply. And when that doesn't happen, as I said, that can kind of be disastrous down the road if a man becomes very disintegrated in his interior life and in his external behaviors. Fathers, this is just very helpful. I'm really grateful for the wisdom that you're sharing for all of our viewers and listeners here through the Herald Magazine and the social media sites of Kenrick-Glennon Seminary. But I'm also very grateful for your wisdom in being able to accompany you and work together so closely in supporting the seminarians from your respective dioceses who are studying here. It's a great privilege to collaborate as a seminary formator with good and holy and talented vocation directors who are really seeking to do the Lord's will and help young people discern very carefully and following the Lord's will. So thanks for your insights today. Please keep up the great work, and let's keep one another in prayer. Thanks for your time, and God bless.